Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of the Minigame Podcast. We'll do some warm up for about an hour, then we'll jump into the video game news. Today is Wednesday, March 5th. So as I scroll down the SteamDB 24-hour concurrent peak chart, which I need to sort the right way to show the numbers in the right order, we will warm up. I'm still playing the Borderlands the pre-sequel. Pretty awful game. Knew that going in. I'm just about done, it feels like. There is perhaps a little bit better quality in the one storyline DLC that came with it. Basically, I think they sold a season pass, which I'm glad we're not really hearing as much promotion and pushing of season passes, but there definitely are AAA games, quadruple A games, if we're actually going to use that phrase, that are pushing season passes. Still, as just a default, it's not even something people are mentioning or thinking about. Otherwise, I'm, let's see, watching Paradise on Hulu. Awful show, I would say. Wow, I didn't really know I was going to say that, but yeah. The concept that it sells it on, that the president has been murdered and there's a murder mystery, is really abandoned almost in the first episode, because the truth of it is it's much more focused on that the world has mostly ended and they are living in underground in this fake world, which, yeah, they, in this latest episode, which I'm not sure isn't just ending the season and possibly ending the series, they reveal not only who killed the president, not that they really cared much, but the pretty obvious thing that they weren't living in a paradise. The main thing there being that this was an underground facility built by a super rich person named codenamed Sinatra, and a whole bunch of billionaires, and a whole bunch of billionaires were secretly running the whole show in an oligarchy, and they've rebuilt this society to be an exact copy of the worst aspects of consumerism and capitalism, and that makes just no sense at all. In the reality of a situation like that, anybody with half a brain would realize you just can't have currency when you have limited resources and a limited number of people, and there's just no reason to stick to currency. You would be bending over backwards to keep people from going crazy and revolting in the first place, so you would do everything possible to keep people happy, but you'd also maintain fairly rigid rationing, and it would just be much more of a local co-op kind of feel, probably a lot more communist / socialist, depending on which way you would go with your economic model, if you could even have an economic model. We really never saw any evidence that people were doing a lot of the entire manual labor. It would have been a more interesting reveal, I suppose, for the next season if there was actually secretly a whole other floor or a whole other city that was below the city you saw, where there's a bunch of just really poor people farming and trying to mine for resources. Paradise is almost an exact contrast. Monster Hunter Wilds here, by the way, in the second place. Still doing amazingly well. Yeah, Paradise is almost the exact opposite of what Silo does, where Silo says there's only, I think, about 10,000 people in the silo, where I think Paradise said there was closer to 20, maybe even 30,000 people in their city. And Silo shows a lot of people cramped together, shows the darkness of what the silo is, whereas Paradise is all about this high-tech fake sky and just making everybody look like they're just pretending like life is exactly the same. Yeah, and that just is really, really unbelievable, and didn't take it in an interesting direction too, because it just skips over a ton of that for no reason. And it does a poor job establishing its characters, really. You have your main protagonist being the best fleshed out, but the killer is basically non-existent until the last second in which he's revealed. The daughter, who's supposed to apparently be a big character, isn't fleshed out enough. The son of the president's not fleshed out enough. The father of the president's not fleshed out enough. The vice president who replaces the president's not fleshed out. All in favor of kind of just focusing more on Sinatra and the main protagonist, which would be alright if this was supposed to be a Walter White bad guy story, except for then Sinatra gets shot at the end and barely even survives. So yeah, it just was, I think, written and thought through poorly as to what it was really going to do. And perhaps that maybe highly echoes that Silo is a whole book series, and they didn't even, I think, start thinking about making a TV series based on Silo. And Apple TV probably has a lot more money to make a good series. But yeah, they didn't even start to think about it until I think 3 or 4 of the books have been out. The entire series may be out for all the research I've done. Whereas if Paradise is a book series, I suspect it is probably an also-ran book series that has only 1 book out at the moment. And yeah, it definitely feels like Paradise is just a late-to-the-party competitor. I'm still watching Psych Season 4. It feels like it might be getting a little bit better. The first 3 seasons also have major problems in streaming in particular, in that I think they were shot on film as like Betamax or something like that. Digital tape, more likely. But there is just some real poor quality resolution in some scenes, and I'm not sure it ever really gets fully fixed. That may also have been a point where they were doing kind of a HD transition, and so there may very well have been a point where HD on film was worse than the standard definition on tape would have been. But yeah, I'm hoping with season 4 Psych will be a little bit better. It is a show that I only caught a few episodes when it first aired, so I do have this weird nostalgia for it. And looking at those first 3 seasons, it doesn't come off particularly great. Again, one of the major problems though I have with Psych, even though I'm bothering to watch a lot of it, and yes, it is taking up more time and that I could be doing something else. One of my major problems with it though is that it is not really a murder mystery show. Like, at best, you're potentially going to see the killer early in the episode, but you're really not going to have any major focus on figuring out who the killer is. It doesn't particularly run into the Sherlock Holmes problem where in the Sherlock Holmes book, the books would not give you details that Sherlock Holmes supposedly caught early in the story and then reveals at the end. Instead, it has the problem that you are following the main protagonist and he's just stumbling on more elements and more evidence throughout the majority of the episodes. So you won't have enough evidence to figure out who did it until you're near the end of the episode, and neither will the protagonist. And there aren't usually a lot of red herrings where you're given evidence to try and push you into thinking one person did it, only for it to be revealed that isn't the case. Or even if you are given red herrings, that you've seen enough episodes that you will know that the first person suggested is almost never the actual killer. Not sure I'm watching too much else. I'm watching the animated show Crapopolis. It's settled into what a lot of the Fox animated shows run into, in that they just become kind of normalized, for lack of a better term, by which I mean there aren't any major peaks or major valleys in the quality of the episodes. It is just kind of a bland, flat line. But yeah, I don't imagine there will ever be anything particularly interesting about any future episode of Crapopolis, which is a damning thing to say, certainly. But it, like Family Guy, like Simpsons for many years, will probably keep my attention span for when I'm really bored every now and then. But yeah, I've watched many episodes of that, not even mentioned it. So yeah, in the long run, I'm watching too much TV. My macro didn't run today, so in particular, I'm really getting to the point where if my macro is not finished by the time I sit down and I'm ready to stream, I need to just manually open all the news tabs, and yeah, I need to see if I can improve the macro again. Although I'm in this weird position where, well, there's several weird positions. I'm in a weird position where I need to build a new computer. I'm in a position like most people who needs to file taxes, so that's probably going to take the rest of this month, just to make sure I get that done. And then I'd think about building a new computer. I'm in a secondary weird position. When I build a new computer, they now have a better graphics card from AMD out. That the reviews are coming in for the, I think it's called the 9700 XT graphics card is the one you're looking for. It being way better than the previous top of the line graphics card, which would have been the 7900 or 7800. They just skipped the 8000 series completely. But yeah, it seems like it is a lot better in a lot of aspects. But also, I'm not willing to buy a new graphics card when I have one I haven't even used yet. And inherently, if I'm making a SteamOS Bazzite Linux gaming PC, I am just, for the price of lesser performance or having to play slightly older games, which I play older games anyways, I haven't played a brand new game in years. For that price, I am getting the reward of moving away from Windows and not just having to move to a Windows 11 setup, which then would push you to a Windows 12 setup in a couple years too. And yeah, from what I hear, Windows 11 is just buggy, so it is worth moving. There is a possibility I get one computer set up and good. I realize at some point I don't need my old computer as a backup, and then put get a new graphics card for my new computer, take the AMD, put it in my old computer, set that up for Bakelite 2, then I would have two computers running Bakelite, one of which I'd probably give away at that point. So yeah, but it kind of sucks when new graphics cards comes out, because then you're not at the top of the line of the graphics. But yeah, this is the first time, I think, in a real long time, if ever, that AMD graphics cards are starting to really compare to NVIDIA. But there is, in the reviews, still way too much talk about FSR4, which is just AI frame rate generation, and similar technologies that is just continuously making fake frames instead of what we really would want, and what seems to be too far away and may always be too far away, which is that the core engine of games could just create, at least for me, a solid 1080p 60 frames per second signal without any need for frame generation, called FSR or something else, because there are several technologies potentially out there. DLSS is what NVIDIA uses. Encoding is also not particularly great. They say for the lower bitrate encodings standards with the newest AMD graphics card. So if it is a matter of saving hours to encode a 2-hour video at 4K or 8K, you probably aren't going to build a powerhouse rendering machine using AMD graphics cards too. And in fairness, that is one of those corporate examples there where you're going to go one of two ways. You're either going to be using a MacBook and just not caring that it takes forever to encode, or some kind of Apple product so you can use all the Apple software, or you're going to just move to Windows 11 because there's so many proprietary Windows 11 softwares that you can use. And if you're going to go to Windows 11, you might as well use a 970 Titan or whatever the top of the line NVIDIA card is at the moment. So yeah, if you are rendering video, there is still an argument to stick with NVIDIA. And yeah, there's still arguments to stick with NVIDIA. Always. If NVIDIA just fixed its Linux drivers and really got it into a nice solid state, then, or open sourced all of their drivers so that the Linux enthusiasts could get it into a nice solid state, then you would see things like SteamOS, once it's installable on all computers, and Bakelite Linux, until that happens, just skyrocket. Because there's plenty of PC gamers out there that pretty much hate Windows and just want to play games. And if everything all of a sudden worked great on Bakelite Linux, and you didn't have to buy an AMD graphics card or build a new computer, that would be way easier a transition for a lot of people. And I guess I will leave it at that. I also am in a weird position in that I have some thought as far as improving the YouTube shorts. I probably mentioned this before in some other streams, as far as taking text to speech and grabbing the self-written descriptions of games and adding text to speech to the YouTube shorts. So then it would be a 3-minute video that is still going to be completely automated and procedurally generated, but instead of just playing a 3-minute segment of songs, or looping 3 minutes of audio in some way, which is what it really is doing, at the beginning it would just have text-to-speech reading out the text. There is two issues there. I have no idea what text-to-speech is and what it sounds like when you're talking potentially software that doesn't cost money, and when you're talking about not using Google's most recent text-to-speech, or probably not using Microsoft's most recent text-to-speech, or any kind of like most recent technology that Apple uses with Siri, or yeah, I imagine there's some other stuff. Like text-to-speech has been around for a long time, but it's all been very robotic. When you're not using cloud servers, and when you're not using either AT&T voice files, at one time were some of the best, but they probably aren't nowadays. But yeah, if you're not using the most recent voice files, it's going to sound somewhat robotic, and that may be alright, and that may just be irritating, and it may not really add much of a value to anything. But there is Linux software that will do that. It's actually Mac OS software called Say does it, and so there are just Linux programs to emulate the same actions as the Say command for Linux. There's also Windows ways of doing it, which puts me in that weird position where I could do this experiment if I were to make it priority, which I really shouldn't. Let's go through this day in history while I'm talking here some more. You could do it on Windows, and then when I move from Windows to Linux, I'd have to redo it all anyways. So I'm in just like the absolute worst time to make any changes. For the most part, my thought is that my new computer would be able to move over all of my macros and everything I do from my YouTube channel universally over to Linux without any real problems, because it doesn't really rely on any specific softwares. And that is certainly also an argument as to why I should move to Linux, is that I have done a pretty great job of getting away from any Windows software that is uniquely Windows or needs Windows. But there is definitely exceptions in that undoubtedly there are going to be some Windows only games worth playing. Which that reminds me, I didn't even remember to bring that up. Memento Mori has announced that they're coming to Steam, which also puts me in a weird position because I don't think the audio is going to get not content ID'd from Memento Mori. So at some point, an idler gacha game like that would not be something I could really show off with the audio on, and since audio is such the sales point for Memento Mori, it is kind of ridiculous to even try and talk about it or show it. There is also a weird thing in that there is already a Memento Mori 1 and a Memento Mori 2 game on Steam, so selling it is already running into some competition as far as names. The actual phrase is a Memento Morte, remember you will die, and I believe it is a Japanese company, Bank of Innovation, changed it to Mori. That's probably easier to pronounce for Asians and is a unique potentially trademarkable, copyrightable term. The general idea of Memento Mori, in case you're not aware, is that it's a idling gacha game that I play on my phone. It has daily quests that can get a little annoying because there's a lot of them. You get these anime girls that using live 2D animation style, in that it almost is animated but not really. It's more just 2D animations that kind of bounce around and have different poses. Now I would say Memento Mori takes the live 2D animation style and does a lot more with it than Destiny Child ever did, the shipped up game Destiny Child. Because it does feel like much smoother animation instead of just stretching and skewing the images. Yeah. But yeah, every single character has a song in a Japanese form, and then they do decent jobs turning those Japanese songs into English songs. They have to, of course, squeeze words in kind of awkward ways to get the same wording and meaning out. And so you're getting introduced to a new character basically every month or so. You try to get that character through a bunch of loot box pulls. You do the daily quest to try to stay free to play in that case, but then you also are not guaranteed that you actually will get the character. New characters will be available for a limited time, and then they'll return after a few months. Almost none of the new characters actually matter too much. Meanwhile, you're getting copies of old characters. You feed the old characters into each other to raise their levels. And one of the things about Memento Mori in particular is that you start the game with very little unlocked. And so it kind of feels like a kind of empty game with not a lot of complex systems. And then it's just over the course of sticking with it for months and months and months that you start to unlock new features. Or there's updates to unlock new features. I just found out that there is a bulk reforge option now, and I'm not sure if that was added because I got over level 300 or if that was added because of an update. But it certainly makes it easier now to go and improve the stats on the equipment you equip on your characters, which, yeah, you get into the weeds certainly as far as just trying to get the characters as strong as possible so you can get them further down the path of very difficult levels. Yeah, but I don't really know what I can do with it, because you're not even really rewarded for letting the game run. It does all of its idling and automation in the background anyways. So yeah, I'm not sure how to really address that. Let's see. Here we're on Steam with all the ad blocks on. So Memento, it's kind of hard to spell. Probably not spelling it right. Mori. And I don't think the search really works well. Yeah. So yeah, you have a game here called Memento Mori from August 13th, 2024. That's not the Memento Mori I'm talking about. You have a game called Memento Mori from 2012, which has a sequel in 2014. You have another game in 2025 called that. So the only thing they've done here to even differentiate themselves is to combine it into one word, which won't even be something I can spell, so let's try Bank of Innovation and see if we can type in the name of the company. Did I mean Bank of Isolation? No, I did not. So then, yeah, searching by the name of the company also makes it not come up. Now it is just like pre-order. So that may be hurting its chance of coming up too. But also I think my spelling is just completely wrong here. M-O-M-E-N. I'll just type it in. M-O-M-E-N-T-O-M-O-R-I. One word. I literally cannot bring it up, and it was just announced. Let's see. Maybe if you search this, hide ignored games. Is there something I am narrowed by language? Ah, maybe that's the issue. Maybe they're not labeled as English. So yeah, I want to talk about it, but I can't even pull it up on Steam. Okay, what would be the next step as far as how could we find it? I thought it was Memento Morte was the real way for it to, was the real saying, but maybe Memento Mori is the actual saying. Bank of Innovation. Can't even DuckDuckGo Memento Mori game. Okay. So it's on their Discord. They announced it, and it was a Steam page too. And that's taken me to Twitter. Interesting. It seems like the announcement has just completely disappeared. Did it get announced early? Or did I dream it all up? No, I didn't dream it up, but boy did I have to jump through hoops to get it to work. So here we are. There is this pastel pencil art style in which all the characters are drawn. In motion it looks a little bit different, but yeah, there is kind of a brownish color palette that you're not used to. So it's not the big, bright, colorful anime styles that you're used to. A big part of that certainly is that almost every character's story of these, they call them witches, powerful anime girls, sometimes who are cats in a couple of instances. They tend to have pretty horrific stories that usually end on a good ending by you, the Duke character, this unseen Duke character, saving them. So it definitely is a hero fantasy. You're saving all the anime girls. The numbers over the eyes are witches of Queeloths, that are the initial bad guys in the story that you save from being brainwashed and turned into raging monsters who are hurting people unintentionally. But the most important thing to point out there is that the vast majority of what you're seeing here is not the actual game. This is the actual gameplay. This is fully automated. This is fully idle. You have a team of 5 attacking usually another team of 5. These cutscenes like this you see at the very beginning of the game and never again, really. And then these story modes you see when you choose to with per character. This is a different daily quest thing that, again, you will click on this, but it will just go back to the standard gameplay and be idle after that. So it's a lot of menu hero stuff. It's not taking too long though. It's coming out apparently in March. And it never had ads in it, so Steam shouldn't have any problem with it, but it definitely has in-app purchases in it. It is an interesting point here to see that A, they can get the music license and get it onto another platform, and B, you could bring it to another platform. I hope it doesn't mean that they're just approaching a point where they're about to abandon the game. It is not an unsuccessful game by mobile game standards, in that it is usually in the top 25 to top 50 games as far as revenue being made. So, yeah. And it certainly isn't anywhere as annoying as your average gacha game, which just is got way too much going on for it. I do think this game probably has a lot going on for it as you get deeper and deeper into it, but it's nowhere as bad as some other games. For instance, in comparison, the Ants game, where I suspected after a week you were going to start getting attacked by other people, has proven that to be true, where your anthill starts to get attacked by other people to try and force players into fighting each other. On top of it, the Ants game that I'm playing, which there's multiple Ants games, this here is what I wanted to show off. If I can pause there. Well, yeah. The Ants game in particular that I'm playing also has gotten to a point where it says you straight up have to just buy something you have to start spending money or you can't progress, which is what you run into as far as a lot of gacha games or mobile games in general. The Ants game is not a gacha game per se, although it does have that aspect. So yeah. As far as Memento Mori, I can't actually hover over the box, but you have guilds you're heavily encouraged to join and somewhat interact with, although they tend to be pretty passive as far as what you're doing. And so as your daily quest, you'll do a guild. If there's a special guild event, there'll be extra work there. Then most of what you're doing is about 5 things under trials. There's a 6th thing, but you have to be pretty high level to do the league player versus player to even be included. Then your main game really is the battle, and on a daily basis you're not really going to do anything with that. You're probably going to get some rewards that will be items in your box, that you have a whole bunch of items, and then your upgrading of characters and feeding characters on a daily basis is something you will do, and leveling up characters is something on a daily basis you'll do. All of that will bring you back to the home, where you'll get rewards for doing all of that stuff, and then you'll take those rewards in usually the form of gems and go to the invoke screen and spend those rewards, those diamonds, to try to get more characters. Very possible you will get more characters, then you'll go back to the character screen and feed characters and the characters again. So yeah, it is potentially slightly looping, although it doesn't loop that much on a daily basis. And then once you've done the daily quest, there's no reason to play the game any further because it is such an idle game. It is a game certainly for people with arthritis in your hands, like me though. It is instead of for people with less time. I also screwed myself up in that I made 2 accounts, and if I only had 1 account, I'd be spending half the amount of time, obviously, on a daily basis. But yeah, the description here, which this is the description that I would be grabbing to do text-to-speech here, says dive into a world where sorrow meets beauty. On that aspect, you do have this real danger if you're depressive that I wouldn't really recommend this game. In that case, you're going to have a pretty strong gut for a game like this, because this is very much laments and lamentations. It is definitely sorrow and sadness in the stories. One of the reasons why Memento Mori in games like this probably can more easily transition to Steam and look good in the screenshots is also because it was always a rotate your screen 16:9, or actually we shouldn't use 16:9 ratios because it very well is not guaranteed to be that ratio. It's always been a landscape format game where you rotate your screen. It's never been a portrait game. We definitely have seen mobile games that were portrait games try to come to Steam, and they do usually a very poor job of taking that portrait images and making it fit a landscape monitor. And I seriously doubt Bank of Innovation has anything else on Steam, nor do I think they really even have anything else that they are working on or worked on. So anyways, that's got me somewhat excited, but also I don't know what I'd really do with it. At some level, as we look at my chart for a brief second here, I could see just Memento Mori running in the background, but I can't really use it like I'm using Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel right now for background backing music. That almost certainly we get content ID'd. And at a certain point I would just be adding it as a screen overlay for fairly silly reasons. It would add some more action to the screen, perhaps, but that's it. There is no trading in Memento Mori, and so in a lot of ways there's not a lot going on, and there's very little competition player versus player in Memento Mori, so that probably is why it's not in the top 20 or top 10 games on mobiles. It doesn't have that much of competition. So the next big thing I'm excited about is that the Godot engine 4.4 has been released. Now, what is somewhat disappointing, as I'm going to scroll down here and just show off the updates as they're showing them, is that it seems like they've done nothing to improve the UI interface elements, which, in fairness, they probably should focus more on game aspects than trying to make the Godot engine even easier for general apps to be run. There is one update now that Linux cameras can be accessed, so you could make more of an app in Linux to access a camera being plugged in, but that's about the only thing specifically around an app. The biggest news though is Jolt Physics. Jolt Physics is an open source physics engine that was created for Horizon Zero Dawn, and now it is being embraced in an experimental tagged format as the default physics engine in the Godot engine. And as far as everybody says, it seems to be a lot better. So here you have an animation on the right showing what the physics is doing, in that you have some squishy bodied 3D polygons that are falling into place and just very naturally, gravity wise, squishing into what would be an invisible box. Furthermore, you have a lot of physics particles being shown there. Although a lot is a relative term. But yeah, the fact that it can handle that many. And take note that these guys, like down here, are not losing their physics as more characters come in. They're still moving around and wiggling. It is possible that they aren't all actually being affected by each other, but it definitely feels like they are. So even at the last of this animation, it definitely feels like the bottom layer is getting more compressed and getting bounced around. So yeah, that's a big deal. And then there's improvements where apparently you can now step into specific steps of a code to test your game. So you can pause the game at a point and then go change something and then return to the game. And now there is an embedded game window. I think, at least as an option, which might be helpful for single monitor setups or for some other reason that you don't want the game to run as its own separate processing. They have Uber shaders, which is, I don't know if you should be using the phrase Uber at this point anywhere, but effectively these are at load time pre-compiled versions of shaders to reduce shader compilation stutter and reduce shader compiling when starting a game, which inherently means that the first time when using Uber shaders you look at something, it might be slightly less quality than for your very specific computer hardware the shaders will be loaded into a cache, and once that process is finished, you will see it better. Which, again, is kind of a compromise, but probably the right compromise that has to be done. And that overall, here's what it looks like without Uber shaders, where you have shaders popping in and it being very stuttery and locking up. And here's what it looks like with Uber shaders. It is very smooth. You're having no lock-in or anything like that. I love how they have just examples here. Although in this case, they can't have the videos line up 100% of the time. But yeah, overall, your experience is going to be, if you see the shaders for 60 hours, you're going to see them in a slightly less quality version the very first time you see them, and then you're going to see them in a good quality version almost every other time you see them. But yeah, if you look at the back of the head of this character, doesn't seem like it has a lot of reflectivity to it, and that's where your shaders are going to come in, where this version, it has a lot more reflectivity to the surfaces. They now have Android editor support for XR devices as far as virtual reality and augmented reality. So now you could pop up the Godot editor potentially in VR like this. I don't know how many people are really going to get that. They also have better 3D physics interpolation to potentially they've decoupled physical ticks and display frame rates and physical interpolation to create additional frames between the last physics position. They also have a new tone mapper, where the old one was called Aces, and so here you have a very purplish neon light as far as tones, and just a lot of purplishness in the background as far as the light that's being thrown and reflected. And in contrast, you now have a very bluish neon light, which feels more realistic and natural, where this feels more animated. The backgrounds and reflected lights also less purplish around that. Okay, so yeah, here's your example when you have it all connected. Here's 10 ticks of the physics engines and frame interpolation all connected. It's kind of slow, and yeah, 10 ticks a second. And here's 10 ticks a second now is how it's processed, where it is much smoother and much more of an experience. Where, yeah. Now at 60 ticks a second or more, if your computers can really handle that, you may not notice. So this might be an example that's been slowed down for example reasons. Yeah, more processing is happening more often where needed in that case. They have now type dictionaries as part of the code, which means you can make a dictionary that is a specific type of information. That it can be, I think is the general idea. Forcing errors like this cannot include a value type of string as a float. See, yeah, you have here in the first command, you're defining a dictionary that is a string and a texture. And then in this next part, you're trying to make a dictionary that is a string and a float, and then put into it what is a string and another string instead of a floating point number, which is what a float is. Apparently some things have happened in the core and editor. Let's see, optimizations. Let's see. Some of this is going to be too much in the weeds though, and not have a lot of examples. I know they have changed that the curves in some 3D models now don't have to be at 0, 1 to start with, or 0, 0. They have also introduced UUIDs so that files are easy to always access. But yeah, it's going to mostly get into the weeds here. This will help a lot with GitHub and version control in particular, as far as just making sure the files are easy recognizable. This they should have talked about earlier. They've introduced 3D object snapping in 3D modeling and placement, which will make things real easy, and several other things. They've added some extra tooltips for when you're actually typing GD script code, which is a big less coding happens in Godot than you might realize, because a lot of it has already been done secretly behind the scenes. Let's see. Some of this I didn't even hear about, and it's just really getting into the weeds. They have this export tool button, so you can add your own button into the Godot editor itself to create a one-click example. Let's see. The Android editor apparently is finally getting export support. I wonder if that is going to lead to actually getting an APK type program. That's something I'd probably want to read more into. They've added Android file picker support, which is something it definitely needed. And they fixed a Java class wrapper, which is probably very helpful too. Let's see, you can apparently also match theme colors, which that is also a weird system in Android, as far as how instead of having custom color options in each individual application, Android just encourages you to have a theme system-wide. Linux added camera support. It was already available in Mac OS and iOS devices, and I'm not sure if it was really added, if it's in Windows devices or not. The Linux devices, well, Linux now, but Mac OS and iOS have a metal rendering backend, which might make you make Mac OS and iOS Godot games run better, and Apple game controller improvements. they have done a major change here in that they have moved from targeting mono to .NET 6, which was released in November 8th of 2021, and end of support happened in November 12th of 2024. And so they now have moved to .NET 8, seemingly skipping over the mono project, which has been pretty much abandoned anyways at this point by Microsoft. It might come back at some point to be something you would use. So yeah, they're skipping completely over .NET 7, assuming .NET 7 even happened. And now C# projects, which is what .NET code is, also supports Android ABIs and BCL APIs, which I don't know what those really are, but I would assume they might be more architectures as far as 32-bit architectures and or different types of CPU chips. They've added in 3D animation, which this is easier to show, a look at modifier 3D, so you can easier now just have a 3D character be told to do something, such as looking at a certain other object, which in no means should you think that that is easy. This would be a massive amount of coding in my mind to do 3D kinematics to figure out how to have a 3D model's eyes look towards a floating ball, on top of which it is clearly been programmed in this example to not turn the head past a certain angle in proportion to in relation to its body. Otherwise, the default definitely would be that the head would just go around in circles following the ball. And that may just be the skeletal structure that you're 3D modeling the character's body with that is preventing it from turning its head past a certain point. So yeah, that's major improvement. They also have Spring Bone Simulator 3D, which here you have an animation of a girl with pigtails in 3D, and you can see her hair bounces a little bit as she runs and sways. Here's what it looks like with the increased jiggle physics. It's way more balanced, particularly in the bangs aspect, as far as how she's swaying and running. And it's not just her bangs, it's also her shirt at the bottom bouncing up, I think, more too. And you have to apply Godot here for, well, it looks like the shirt basically bounces up the same, so it's mostly the bangs. You have to apply Godot here for A, making more simplistic generic example 3D models, and B, not using this for what it most likely would be assumed to be used with, which is to make a big breasted anime girl and watch the jiggle physics bounce up even more, where that's more than likely assumed that it's going to be. You can also now put markers in animations and have characters jump to specific spots in the animations. So major improvements. You can now also load WAV files at runtime, just like you could OGG or Vorbis audio. So assuming I'm reading this right, that means you could have like a Guitar Hero like game that would let you use a file picker to find a WAV file and add it into the game during runtime, whereas otherwise you would have to load in a different file format that people are less familiar with. There's apparently faster imports due to a texture compressor. There's GITF extension for animated imports. Let's see. Several other things there. You can now add custom colors for collision shapes. Light maps, bicubic sampling and transparency. Here's what it looks like on, and here's what it looks like off. So take notice how there's more of a feathering right here on this black line of the shadows, which is more realistic in the real world, whereas the sharp shadow edges here don't look as good. I don't think there's too much to really see about this plant though, or any other point. So this is an example that's taking up a lot of screen space to really have you just look at this. It probably would have helped if they had just put big red circles around what they want you to look at in some of these examples, although they also are just assuming that you probably know what you're looking for. You have vertex shading, which gives a retro vibe, it feels like. So you may see more of these low polygon type shading. Batching to drastically increase the number of draw calls. So yeah, just a lot of improvements here. And then they have a massive amount of special thanks, which I'm not sure why specific people get bigger names. Maybe that's by their commit numbers, or maybe that's by their money donation. I'd imagine it's by their commit numbers as far as how many changes they added. So yeah, a lot of improvement and excitement to be had there if you care about the Godot engine at all, which as a gamer I think it, on some small level at least, behooves you to keep an eye out for this open source engine, because if it continues to just have great levels of improvement and great levels of adoption, which is the other if, it may very well become a de facto standard that actually competes with Unity and Unreal Engine. That being said, it is also worth pointing out that there was not a single example there where they showed you a hyper-realistic Call of Duty type game or any kind of first-person shooter aspects. So while you can probably make those in the Godot engine, they are not really being prioritized at the moment. No ray tracing talk or anything like that. No DLSS, no FSR. So yeah, that is all aspects. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take a small bathroom break, so I'm going to pause the recording, and then we will move forward into the news. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. You know, that's pretty much a great example of just the problem I constantly have, in that I have no ability to shorten anything, so my excitement about talking about the Godot engine there really went for many, many minutes, and any other content creator would have probably thought, pre-record some thoughts, write down some thoughts, shorten it quite a bit. Although, in fairness, there's definitely just a lot to talk about there, and so the vast majority of people who I do follow who talk about the Godot engine are taking out just a few things to talk about and leaving a lot on the cutting room floor. And I guess it's just not within me to not be more complete than that. Whether it's me making pre-recorded footage, which at some point will actually air on my channel, again, if I am lucky, or even just talking on the subject. I really want to touch on every aspect. But clearly the vast majority of the audience doesn't. They just want the headlines. And even when I talk about video game news, usually I personally just want the headlines. So anyways, let's look at Steam and then we'll jump into the video game news pretty quickly here. Apparently it's International Women's Day, as far as to why they were having that Women's Day sale. That has nothing to do with the Visual Novel Fest, though. But yeah, the Women's Day sale is already off the front page. Or, yeah, here it is. Women's Day sale. Which I can't help but wonder if there is an International Women's Day and a United States Women's Day, or Mother's Day is just kind of getting mixed in with that in my mind. At some point there might have been a US Mother's Day or Women's Day that maybe no longer exists too, so that's another thought, certainly. Otherwise though, I guess nothing has really changed. Nothing new seems like it has come out. That seems like that might be somewhat new. Here you have Hentai Prison, or Henpri, it's been shortened. Oh, here's that Carmen Sandiego game. Let's look at that. See how that works. It is being received. And then, yeah, for this Wednesday midweek deal, there's just like nothing else catching my eye, so we can move forward. Carmen Sandiego is 72% positive so far. I definitely had some real concerns about what this new Carmen Sandiego game was going to be. First of all, the Netflix series, at least the first season of that, made Carmen Sandiego not the bad guy per se, and more the protagonist. And I seems like if they're going to call it a Scarlet Super Thief Carmen Sandiego, then she's back to being the bad guy. The second aspect on this was, while this looked like it had some small aspects to feel kind of like the old Carmen Sandiego games, I think the truth of it is that there's a whole bunch of mini games and things that they also are trying to add and promote, which gives the whole thing a feel like it is potentially going to be very short and just kind of a cheap cop-out. Here you can see old Carmen Sandiego games. You be Carmen Sandiego. Are you being chased then and playing as a bad guy? But yeah, the flying aspect I think is a mini game, and swinging and all of that. Yeah, that's all very much stuff that has not been in regular Carmen Sandiego games. says outsmart Vile, so it probably is a case where Carmen Sandiego is still the good guy, like the Netflix series, and she's going against worse bad guys in Vile instead of being the head of Vile, which is what she would have been. Yep. And I definitely feel like this was a game in particular targeting like young kids and Switch users first and foremost. But yeah, I'll be interested to see if it gets enough relevancy and a lot of positive reviews. Gameloft kind of has a history of not making a ton of interesting games. See, Disney Dreamlight Valley would be their other game. Very poorly advertised, even though very positively received. And then Disney Speedstorms. So does Disney own Carmen Sandiego now? I mean, Disney basically owns everything. But yeah, you can see there's lots of free-to-play games here. Oregon Trail. Yeah, Gameloft must have just bought the rights to Oregon Trail and Carmen Sandiego at some point. Or gotten the licenses at least. Now, I saw on Slick Deals that there was some refurb Steam Decks available, and I am noticing now that there are some refurb Steam Decks. $519 right now for the 1TB OLED. Very decent deal, in my opinion. I wouldn't recommend the LCD versions. We still have pretty good confirmation that we're not getting a new Steam Deck in at least 5 to 6 months, and probably a lot longer than that. So yeah, there's really no reason to wait. In comparison, buying just the new AMD graphics card is going to be $600. So you are either going to be a uniquely Linux focused PC gaming enthusiast building a $3,000 computer, or you could buy the Steam Deck and get into decent mid-tier hardware in a handheld form factor that will let you play a lot of old games, and you may not really run into too many games you can't play. Now, inherently, there is a danger of buying a Steam Deck and not having a PC, gaming PC first, in that you will eventually run into some games that don't run on the Steam Deck. So it's still very much likely that you should have some kind of gaming PC first. But if money is an issue, a Steam Deck right now is a decent thought, particularly if you already have like a Switch and aren't going to get a Switch 2, or don't want to play Nintendo games so you don't have any Nintendo things. If you have a PlayStation 5, a Steam Deck also makes a lot of sense. If you have an Xbox Series X or a Series S, that a Steam Deck also makes a lot of sense. Having something that is a backup for perhaps newer games. And the Switch really doesn't even satisfy that requirement. It would be a very different reason why you would have a Switch and a Steam Deck. Of course, I have to also admit that I'm a terrible example as far as giving that suggestion, as I haven't done anything with my Steam Deck at all since getting it. It's nice to have it, but as a backup, but that's basically all I've had time to do. Now, let's refresh this page and see if it's still in stock. Well, interestingly, in refreshing the page, not only did nothing go out of stock, the 512 came back into stock. Which, yeah, if you want to save a few more dollars, get the 512. It's not a bad gimmick at all, as far as here is a thing that lets you play a lot of games. The extra 512 gigabytes is not even something that you probably are going to need. Like, it's going to be the difference of installing 4 or 5 games at one time on a 512 gigabyte to 8 to 10 games at the same time on a 1 terabyte. In reality, if you're going to go with big storage usage, which would either be playing several AAA games all at the same time, which you really couldn't do if you plugged in an external hard drive. What you really would be using an external hard drive for would be massive libraries of probably ROMs of probably pretty modern games. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Xbox Series games. I'm not even sure you can emulate Xbox Series games, but yeah. If you were going to plug in an external hard drive like that, it would be a lot cheaper. I saw slick deals for like a 24 terabyte external spinning hard drive. It's going to be slow, but that would be a ton of space for those kinds of things. Probably way more than you need. In reality, a nice curated collection of ROMs is not going to take up anywhere near that, particularly if you're talking older NES and arcade ROMs. It's at most then a big external hard drive might be full of movies, which those tend to take up a lot of space too. So yeah, you have to get really piratey and really or really ambitious to need a lot of extra space on the Steam Deck. Yeah. That is one thing that the Steam Deck also kind of, in the way it's designed, it's not really designed to be completely backed up either. So backing up your home drive to an external hard drive, your home folder, is not going to take up that much space compared to a full disk image copy, which is what a Windows backup might do. So yeah, I really don't think you need the extra 512. I think you save the difference of about $50 right now, and you save that for the next Steam Deck, which inevitably the next Steam Deck may very well have somewhere closer to 640 gigabytes by default built into it just because of the price, or the price will be lower because it's still 512 gigabytes. Anyways, that will bring us to Video Games Chronicle news. So Sega has taken Capcom's crown as Metacritic's highest rated publisher of 2024. Metaphor ReFantazio publisher Sega beat the 2023 Capcom in annual publishing rankings, which is an odd headline, first of all, because you're leaning on Metacritic and putting way too much emphasis and importance on Metacritic, and second of all, you're combining game publisher releases all together. So yeah, in the last year, Sega released Metaphor ReFantazio, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So 3 major games that are somewhat different compared to Capcom in the same year, which I suspect put out less games. They don't even really have a list here. So yeah, this is an example of a list that is hard to digest and really understand because of the way they're combining and breaking things apart. But yeah, according to the list, Sega was the best publisher last year, then Capcom, then Access Games. I don't even know what Access Games released. Then Sony. Sony, I think, just released Astrobot. Wouldn't there be more of a difference there between 3 games versus 1? Focus Home Entertainment, don't know what they released. Gamera Games, don't know what they released. Square Enix, maybe put out like 1 Final Fantasy game. Raw Fury, don't know what they released. Microsoft released some real stinkers, I think, last year, so I don't even know how it's in the 9th place. And then Annapurna Interactive, again, I don't know what they released. So, yeah. On top of giving Metacritic way too much authority there, you're just confusing the issue. So that's the kind of story that I feel like is pretty useless. It also certainly plays into the stupidity of video games in particular, trying to have publishers be the thing gamers think about. Like a publisher is the artist creating art, instead of the reality of the situation in that individual people are the people creating the art in games, and at best a collaborative effort between a group of people happens within a developer, not a publisher. It's the difference between trying to make an argument that 2K makes the Borderlands series good or bad because they own the rights to it and publish it, versus Gearbox in Frisco, Texas being the people that make Borderlands games good or bad, when Gearbox is actually the team that makes them. Borderlands, the pre-sequel, definitely gives off the impression that it was 2K Australia that made the majority of that game, although I think maybe the DLC in the last third of the game may have had more influence from Gearbox. And certainly Gearbox doesn't make it any easier in that they opened another office in Vancouver at one point. I'm not sure it's still open though. Moving on, apparently iconic TNA wrestlers debut in WWE 2K25 DLC. WWE bought out TNA at one point. Which, yeah, I didn't watch a lot of TNA, but they were around as a competitor to WWE back when I was wasting time watching WWE. But like, I recognize this guy, I think in part because a lot of these people were at WWE or WWF at the time also, and not at the same times, but they would move back and forth. So I recognize this guy, I kind of recognize this guy, and I think that is it. Maybe I recognize that guy and that guy, but yeah, these are also fairly generic wrestling builds and faces. But yeah, imagine that will make a few people happy. I guess that is one of the few things that these wrestling games can do, is just continuously put all the characters and all the people possible into the games, on top of doing the obvious thing of making a good game, which seems sometimes beyond WWE games capability. Apparently Bam Margera is not returning to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4. Let's see. Apparently he's a troubled skater. Wasn't he one of the Jackass stars? Yeah, that I think he was drinking and maybe doing drugs, I'm not sure. So much that even the other Jackass people had a kind of intervention with him. It was just how much he's apparently faced a string of health and legal issues due to issues related to substance abuse. He was fired from Jackass Forever after he was issued with a restraining order from the Jackass director, Jeff Tremaine. Tremaine had previously fought for years to include Margera in the reunion film. So yeah, he sounds like he's a real mess. Honestly, I think more of these stories should be made public, as far as just, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If you have substance issues, you're going to have substance issues. And it's a hard road that not everyone succeeds on, to stay sober or even try to be sober. And inherently, I have to wonder if there isn't a lot more people in the public eye in Hollywood, in particular, who have similar problems, who have in previous decades and years gotten away with hiding it a lot better. And yeah, not every single person who uses drugs or drinks is going to become a huge mess and have a even highly successful career fall apart, but some people definitely will. Usually it's just kind of smaller things that you're trading off by doing drugs to an excessive level. But yeah, seems very much like nobody wants a part of him, and nobody wants him in the new game. And yeah, let's see, the game Thank Goodness You're Here has won the UKIE's Game of the Year award. I guess we have to basically leave it at that, since as an Americano, I don't really follow UKIE's award show. It's undoubtedly yet another award show that has some stream somewhere, but does not get anywhere the level of promotion and push like the Game Awards does. And yeah, Jeff Keighley has just done an amazing job of having mainstream video game journalism talk about the Game Awards above everything else, and promoting it himself, getting game publishers and game developers to promote the Game Awards also. The Russo brothers are definitely open to developing games tied to the upcoming Avengers movies. The production company founded by the Russo brothers has big plans in the gaming space. It's this weird secondary headline. Do the Russo brothers not run Russo Brothers Productions or whatever it's called anymore? I think they do. And yeah, video games tied to the Marvel movies are probably something that should happen, and that Marvel really should be this multi-transmedia effort, even though it has fairly failed in that case. The Marvel movies haven't really encouraged people to read Marvel comics. The Marvel TV shows are basically non-canon at this point, particularly the ones that pre-Disney Plus, and a lot of Marvel movies aren't even worth watching at this point. So yeah, it probably should have been a successful transmedia effort, but perhaps that would just lead to oversaturation. And inherently, I just don't imagine that we're going to have a game done in time for the next Marvel movie. There is just a big difference between spending 2, maybe 3 years making a movie and 4 to maybe 8 years of making a video game. If anything, it's probably a lot smarter to just have them be separate things. Which, in fairness, yeah, Marvel Rivals is happening right now. It is in no way connected to any of the Marvel movies, and it is having massive success. So video games themselves really don't need movies, and movies make less money than video games do at this point. And they definitely take up people's time and mind share a lot more. Let's see, NetEase is offering compensation after a last-minute console delay for the hero shooter Fragpunk. The PC version will still be released this week, but the console launch has been pushed back. Okay. Weirdly, this is like the first time I think I've even heard of Fragpunk. But yeah. I was thinking about that hero shooter, I can't even remember the name, that Gearbox tried to make, and it really is a sad example of Gearbox just not having enough money when 2K isn't really funding and publishing something new. Because that clearly was an effort there for them to try to make something like Team Fortress 2, try to have a constant revenue source on an IP they actually owned, and try to do something different than just continuously making more Borderlands games. And yeah, it's sad that it failed, and inherently I imagine 2K was very happy for it to fail so that they can pigeonhole Gearbox into only making Borderlands games, which that's not inherently working out great either, because the Borderlands games are getting worse and getting played out too. But yeah, Gearbox's recent history in the past few years really is an obvious example of them trying to be independent, them trying to have money on their own from 2K, them trying to do anything other than 100% Borderlands, and them just failing on every single aspect. Let's see. Sega has promised fewer new games but deeper investments in Sonic, Atlas, and Like a Dragon, which is interesting in contrast to the Metacritic article, which they just won that listing, probably because they had more games. In fairness though, I guess the question here is, what game did they release recently that was particularly a flop? I can't really think of anything, so I don't know what really is there. I do have a question around Sonic in particular, as far as, are we going to see more 3D open world Sonic games made? Because the last one was a pretty well received. But yeah. I would kind of hate if they totally gave up on the 3D open world Sonic games, because I actually did want to play that one that came out. Of course, I haven't gotten around to it. In fact, really, I'm getting to probably past the 5-year point where there's been way more games that I've wanted to play versus games I've actually played. Yeah, it's a crying shame, really. If only I had more energy, if only I had more time. Let's see. I hate to talk about politics, but it is a headline, so we'll go through it quickly. Trump tariffs threaten the future of physical video games, analyst warns. Both Mexico and China are among the world's largest producers of game discs and consoles. I've also been seeing sales go on for like 4K Blu-rays and physical discs as far as movies. That may be for a very different reason though, as the sales numbers for physical disc movies is falling pretty quickly. And in fairness, there's just some really bad offerings and things just not worth actually owning in physical media. For instance, I saw a sale for Airplane 1, Top Secret, and Top Gun. Yeah, the 3 major like Zaz movies is what they're labeled as, but Naked Gun is what it is called. Yeah, Top Secret, Naked Gun, Airplane 1 in 4K Blu-ray. I question heavily if any of those movies are going to look particularly better in 4K Blu-ray, first of all, but also, if I'm getting Airplane 1, I expect you to throw in Airplane 2 for free in a collection, even though most people probably won't watch it. If I'm getting Naked Gun, then I kind of expect you to throw in the TV series of Police Files, which is very similar to it. Top Secret is a standalone movie, so I wouldn't expect that. But also, if you're not throwing in Police Files with Naked Gun 1, you definitely should be throwing in Naked Gun 2 and Naked Gun 3. So it is just like a weird sampler collection being sold as an incomplete collection, really, of Leslie Nielsen stuff. And if you really were going to go with Leslie Nielsen stuff, there's a lot more Leslie Nielsen movies that you could include. They're all comedies now, so do you really need them in 4K to see? And I don't think Leslie Nielsen actually is in Top Secret at all, so you can't really make that collection make sense. So yeah, increasingly it is, as far as physical media for movies, it's harder and harder to justify buying movies unless they are very rare and hard to find movies, or there's just a high level of action and quality that you expect to see in a 4K version of that. That's why I got the Matrix collection, and that's why I got Real Steel in 4K. Those are movies that make sense in 4K. But then there was also like sales I've seen for like John Wick movies, and I haven't even seen those, so buying them is harder to justify. The other kind of weird things are anime in particular, because that's hard to get unless, even if you have a streaming service like Crunchyroll, there's a chance that a lot of anime might disappear or be hard to find in the future. I saw that there's a new Akira Steelbook in 4K, which would be potentially the third time I would buy Akira. It might only be the second time if I was to buy that. And yeah, kind of hard to justify, particularly when it's animated, that it needs to be in 4K, particularly if it also wasn't made for theaters in the first place. But we're supposed to be talking about video games, so what I'm assuming here is the headline is the physical production of the game discs are done in China and Mexico, which, yeah, let's look at the number. 20% of China tariffs impact video game consoles, smartphones, GPUs, laptops. 25% tariff on Mexico impacts physical video games. China is where most hardware continues to be manufactured. Same for Mexico with discs. So yeah, that's what the analyst has to say, and I guess we can just move on from there. It's going to be up to you whether you believe it, or up to time to find out if it's true or not. And that's how you avoid having a longer political discussion. Moving on, PlayStation Visual Arts and Malaysia studios have reportedly suffered many layoffs, which I wouldn't be surprised if in countries like Malaysia there's just a lot less reporting and legal requirement to report when people are laid off. And yeah, I don't even know what Visual Arts. Apparently, it was founded in 2007 and it worked on The Last of Us Part 1. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. Let's see. Assassin's Creed Shadows boasts a 30 to 40 hour main campaign with potentially adding a new game plus. I wonder what the main campaign of something like Assassin's Creed 2 was. If you just did the main campaign and didn't collect all 100 feathers and wasn't doing all the side quest stuff. Or more realistically, a comparison would be like Odyssey or Origins, what the main campaign length of those are. 30 to 40 hours does seem short even for your average game, but particularly for an Assassin's Creed game where in the past things like Assassin's Creed 2 really encouraged you to spend 100 to 200 hours in a game. Seems like the series has, in going in several different directions, also shortened itself quite a bit. Which, yeah, that's somewhat believable. And it definitely is a different experience in Origins and Odyssey as far as how 100 hours would be spent compared to Assassin's Creed 1 or 2 would be. I don't even think 1 was particularly that long, but it still was probably way longer than 40 hours. GTA 5's Auto Enhanced Edition is now available on PC. This is next-gen console features and modern PC enhancements. It will be interesting to see if that is received well or negatively, because I could see it going either way. Remember last time there was an enhanced edition of GTA on PC. It was very poorly received with the remasters of 2, 3, and 4, I believe. Let's see. Activision reveals the worst kept secret ever in that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 plus 4 remaster is coming for consoles and PC. It's going to be released in July. Okay. I guess one question to ask here, is there even a Tony Hawk 5? Or are they possibly rushing to get 3 and 4 out because they are also working on some new Tony Hawk game and they didn't want the competition? It may very well be that they're not working on a new Tony Hawk or skating game in general, though. Sony has announced a centralized PlayStation beta program for the PS5 and PC. Players can now register for a new beta program at PlayStation. I think you would be pretty foolish to decide to sign up for some new PlayStation service that is going to be inherently online and also take your personal information, considering Sony has been hacked in the past and their online service is pretty bad. Inherently, I wonder if if betas in a lot of ways are now very much targeting content creators, and I think that's probably a mistake for content creators to think that they really are getting any kind of special early access or advantage by playing the beta version of a game. Probably also because you're probably breaking some kind of NDA by covering the beta version of a game. What the betas are these days tend to be really just buggy versions of early access anyways. It is a completely different situation if you have an uncle that works at Sony that gives you early access and you only are the person that has early access, versus beta programs like this where hundreds, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people will be let in, many of them being content creators trying to create content earlier in the hopes that that will get them more views, which I don't think it really does. And I think it definitely shifts your focus more and more away from playing games you know you want to play to just playing games that are following the trend or the newest games possible. Which then creates content creators who have nothing to say because they have no opinion on the games that they were not really interested in playing in the first place, other than saying they weren't really interested in playing it in the first place. So there's no real passion there. Moving on, just 4 months after its release, Dragon Age The Veilguard has joined the PlayStation Plus streaming offerings, which I guess the idea there is that they are assuming sales weren't great. Let's see, there were apparently surprising snubs and rising indie stars at the BAFTA events. As they unpacked their Game Awards shortlist. The Oscars happened too. I didn't pay any attention to it. Doesn't have anything to do with video games, and I don't watch enough new movies to care. Does Video Games Chronicle have an actual list here of the short list? As far as I can tell, no, they don't. And the BAFTAs are the British Arts and Films group, so yeah, not particularly as talked about or as prestigious as even the Game Awards. Let's see. We already talked about PlayStation Plus users receiving compensation after a recent outage. Some of these may be redundant. Monster Hunter Wilds being the fastest Capcom game selling ever, I think might be new news, regardless. It sold 8 million units in 3 days. Apparently, Japanese players overwhelmingly favored domestic game series last year. A new survey suggests none of the 20 most popular series named by those were made in the West. Which, interesting. In particular, because this might also be a survey that highlights favorite hardware or excludes PC gamers. But yeah, apparently, if this survey is to be believed, then this isn't really just a list of most recognizable and favorite series. It's Final Fantasy, Legend of Zelda, Super Mario. Yeah, what Super Mario is a great example, and what Zelda is a great example here. Did any of those games even come out in the last year, or is this just a very open list in which you can say you played some kind of Super Mario? You could be playing Super Mario Bros. 1, for instance, and still put it on the list. It is a slightly odd list, though, in that Dragon Quest was probably played a lot more than Legend of Zelda, so they're not really comparing hours here. Pokemon in general, Splatoon in general, Elden Ring. Interesting how they consider Elden Ring to be a domestic game, when I would make an argument that Elden Ring, even though it looks like a Dark Souls Demon Souls game and plays like a Dark Souls Demon Souls game, it still was written by George R.R. Martin to some extent, and definitely was more of a Western, worldwide focused release. Not just with, although most of these games are trying to sell all around the world. But yeah, it's kind of hard to call that 100% domestic. Like a Dragon, Momotaro Densetsu. I'm not sure that one even comes to the West in English. Animal Crossing. Again, some of these Nintendo games are very much generically designed for everybody. Persona. Resident Evil, certainly made by domestic companies, but it's questionable if it isn't designed to be targeting more of the more of the world, in the Western world in particular. The way Resident Evil games have become more and more action based, whereas they would probably be more horror based if they were 100% trying to target domestic people, Japanese people exclusively. You'd also see probably more references to Japanese characters and Japanese locations and stories. Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, Unicorn Overlord. They consider that a Japanese game? Is it really? Armored Core, Powerful Pro Baseball. Baseball still big? Shiren the Wanderer, Nier, and Genshin Impact. Yeah. Unicorn Overlord in particular is one I want to search. Even though this is going to take too much time to really do it. We'll search Wikipedia here. Unicorn Overlord looks like a JRPG. It was developed by Vanillaware, which is a Japanese video game developer. Okay. I must be thinking of a different game. Yeah, I definitely am. Moving on, Nintendo has also successfully blocked a French file storage site from hosting pirated games. The French Supreme Court says OneFeature.com is liable for failing to remove unauthorized copies of Nintendo games. I've never heard of this website. I don't know if it was generically a pirate site or if it was just an upload site in particular. But yeah, I guess we will see probably more of these kinds of cases happen all around the world. I also heard that France, I think it is France, is trying to pass a law that would just like destroy end-to-end encryption. So increasingly, security is going to be taken away from individuals in the name of fighting terrorism or whatever they're going to claim, leading to easier search and seizures, which is what they really want. They want massive surveillance and massive search and seizures. Yeah. This does look like it's probably an upload site that was being used to probably upload and share a lot of copyrighted data. Although inherently, also, if you were trying to make a pirate site, you wouldn't just make it in France and host it in France. And most sites probably would have just gotten a DMCA-like takedown notice and taken down the files immediately, if not proactively tried to take down files like that. And it is also worth pointing out, most people who are trying to download this file should not be downloading them that way. They should be doing all kinds of VPNs and torrents and Tor onion router project type stuff to hide their activities as best as they possibly can, and they may still very well get caught, so it's extremely risky. It's also a case of most people downloading ROMs probably won't even, a lot of them won't even use them, so it may not be worth the time and the effort. We already talked about Tony Pro Hawk Skater release date and pre-order details being leaked, and now it's been updated to be official. And then apparently a critically acclaimed roguelike has made a surprise return to Xbox Game Pass. Monster Train has returned to Game Pass after being removed more than a year ago. Interesting. I have heard a few people say that Monster Train is an interesting game. Overwhelmingly positive on Steam. But yeah. Still not putting direct links to Steam, apparently. The iconic game publisher Acclaim has been resurrected with the wrestler Jeff Jarrett as advisor, which that seems like that it's kind of all over the place, but I think Acclaim probably did release some wrestling games. They went bankrupt 20 years ago though, so inherently if corporations are people, they are zombies. In the case that they can die, which is what bankruptcy basically is, and then be resurrected 20 years ago. Although maybe corporations are trying to make an argument here that they're more like Jesus and that they can be resurrected at any point. But yeah, the reality of this is not a single person that worked at Acclaim 20 years ago is likely going to be working at Acclaim today. Not a single person that worked on any of the games from the Acclaim of 20 years ago is going to get any kind of residuals for anything that Acclaim might own, which more than likely they don't really own the license or IP to anything. If they've been bankrupt for 20 years, that almost certainly has all been sold off to other companies. So all you really have is a name and a logo at this point, and a lot of ambition, maybe some nostalgia. You can try to get people to buy in on. On the other hand, a game like this, Alien 3, is not something I've seen re-released or talked about, so there is a possibility here that there might be a real enthusiasm and effort to bring back some old games, which makes me remember there was an old game I wanted to talk about that I'd never even heard of. Let's see if I can just pull it up. The ScumVM engine has been entered once again into the Google Summer of Code, and only slightly related to that, they have started testing on this game called Dark Seed, which apparently is a psychological horror point-and-click adventure game, which is right down my alley, in particular since it is from H.R. Giger, the maker of the Aliens from the Alien series and the maker of a lot of very interesting artwork in particular. So our artwork is very dark, and there, in a documentary I watched about him, it seems like very possibly his own dark artwork may have in part led to his wife's depression and later, I think, suicide. So I guess there's a danger there too. I'd like to see some more pictures of this. It seems crazy to me, though, that this game never crossed my path. And there's a whole sequel too. But then there's just been a massive amount of old games that are easy to miss. And I'd have to assume that this game in particular does not run well and has not been playable in decades. So yeah, there is some real crazy stuff around that, around games like this, because it just is basically forgotten media effectively from video games, and that there are some weird people who have had some really influential games that have just been forgotten about, or famous people who have put their voice acting into games. So yeah, I'm excited to hear about that the ScumVM engine is starting to work to get that playable. It is likely if Dark Seed 1 gets playable on the ScumVM engine, it won't be that much extra work for the Dark Seed 2 to be playable. See if we can see some different artwork, and that's probably about all we can see. H.R. Giger's artwork being a big seller, sells point. Do we have any screenshots? I guess that's the question. Yeah. Let's see, which one do we want to really click on? Seems like a lot of them are fairly simplistic, not grotesque images. Boy, do these pictures not look particularly high res. Here they're making reference to Guybrush Threepwood of The Secret of Monkey Island. But yeah, it doesn't really feel like it's even full of horrific imagery as much as I would have expected. There's one. But yeah, kind of amazing that to have a whole new game from so long ago pop up. So yeah, again, as a content creator, I would have to see a game like that find the licensing rights or somehow end up on Steam, since I really only cover Steam games, to justify covering it. Otherwise, I'm going to have to make a special exception to just play the game and go, well, there's no way to actually get this without downloading the ROM somewhere. Unless it is public domain, and if it is public domain, then there probably will just be a link directly on ScumVM to download it. Moving on, Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 dominates the BAFTA Game Awards nominations. Astrobot, Still Wakes the Deep, and Thank Goodness You're Here also lead the BAFTA nomination. Now, inherently, I would have to assume that the BAFTA nominations can only include stuff that was made in the UK, which is the only explanation I can think of as to why Hellblade 2 would even be mentioned. It may also certainly speak to the idea that Hellblade 2 is very pretty looking, and that pretty looking games get the nominations in BAFTA, which would argue that I heavily suspect the jury pool of the people making the nominations of the BAFTAs might not actually be playing the video games, or may just not have the understanding of how video games should really be criticized or played, because they just haven't played enough of them for long enough in their life. Of course, this also could be a case where Hellblade 2 just did a for-your consideration campaign and got a bunch of nominations, and then shows up as the winner in none of the categories, which is about as much as I would expect they deserve. It's important to point out I did not enjoy Hellblade 1, and as far as I can tell, Hellblade 2 is more, even worse so, of Hellblade 1. And then the Xbox Game Pass reveals a March lineup with 33 Immortals launching on day 1. Do we have a list here? Monster Train, Galacticare, One Lonely Outpost, Enter the Gungeon, Mullet Mad Jack, and 33 Immortals. And that's going to bring us to the Gematsu articles. So we'll go through them pretty quickly. Some of these we've already talked about. I think we talked about Peppered launching for PC on April 7th. I guess the easiest way to have tested that would have been to just click the Steam link. Yep. Suikoden 1 and 2 Remastered Gate Rune and Dunin Unification Wars launch trailer is available. It's due out March 6th. Looks like an old game collection getting re-released. A Suikoden the anime has been announced based on Suikoden 2. Interesting. So they really are pushing it. In fairness, if there was actually a lot of really good JRPGs of old, but the animation looked pretty bad, but the story was good, there probably should be several dozen more animes based on JRPGs. But the truth of it is the story is never that good. It is very often, here is a magical bad guy threatening to destroy the world. You're going to grind through a game where very little story occurs, and then end up beating the bad guy, and that's just about it. There tends not to be a lot of twists and betrayals or interesting secondary characters in JRPGs, just because of the nature of JRPGs. But clearly they're going deep into Suikoden, with Starleap also being announced for iOS and Android. Yeah, this is Konami, though. I imagine just going deep in their back catalog as far as trying to get people to buy some video games from them, because Konami can't make money in any of the other industries and sectors that they would probably prefer to be involved with, such as gyms. And I think Konami owned a bunch of gyms before COVID basically destroyed that concept. Monster Hunter Wild sales topped 8 million in 3 days. We talked about that. Mad Jack is coming to the Xbox One and Series on March 13th. It's currently already available on Steam. So let's see. It is overwhelmingly positive. It is not in early access. So unless there was a special reason for me not to put it on the wish list, I should put it on the wish list. The cozy platformer Illa, the Frosty Glide, is going to be published by First Break Labs for all consoles and PC. Interesting. It's interesting how cozy as a descriptor has just become the new shorthand for a softer CGI animation style, or perhaps a softer gameplay mechanic. Game publisher Acclaim returns with a focus on indie studios and classics. Well, it'll be a while though, I guess, until they have a real game to announce. Xbox Game Pass added all of these games, which we already talked about. Nocturnal 2 title has been changed to Yetash, a Nocturnal Poem, both the spin-off and next installment in the Nocturnal series. I guess the question in particular would be, what is Nocturnal 1 and how is it doing? Well, this is a game that came out in 2023, and apparently I didn't get around to looking at it since then. It is received very positively. So again, this would be the kind of game that you might consider going back and playing to catch up. This does put me in an interesting quagmire. Not that big of a change, but I guess if a name change happens, I should make a new YouTube short, because the whole idea of YouTube shorts is to get some search engine optimization. So that is one way, I guess, to get a second YouTube short. Odenfall launches in early access on March 11th. It's a Viking-themed roguelike stick shooter, which I question how you do a twin stick shooter and have it be Viking themed at the same time. At a certain point, it feels like you'd be doing something more like a Space Marine if that was the case. Dotemu has announced an arcade beat-em-up called Absolem for PS4 and Switch, PS5, and PC. Let's see if we've seen that already. No. These announcements still coming up pretty frequently and pretty quickly. We already talked about the beta program. I don't play on PlayStation or have a PlayStation, so I'm not particularly interested in it. Let's see, we already talked about Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4. Do they have a Steam link so that we can put it on the fall list? Again, I would assume these are just re-releases of those games, and that maybe there's been some visual tweaks and remastering a little bit, but they're not even really calling it a remaster. I wouldn't assume that this is a whole new game that just has levels from 3 and 4. A lightning fast real-time strategy game, Jelly Troops, adds a Switch version. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's see. Beckside announces a Fruit Mountain Party for PC. It's apparently a multiplayer entry in the Fruit Mountain series, a series I do not recognize at all. Oh, yeah. These are these games that were popular for what felt like just a brief second, where you're stacking fruit and trying not to have them fall off the plate. Which I imagine is not really something too many people really care to play these days. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1889 are out. Let's see. So they have, is it wrong to try to pick up a girl in a dungeon? Girls in a dungeon, familiar myth, full end of water and light. So, like, manga name, spin-off, sequel name, game sequel name, getting a particularly low 26 out of 40. And then the other one they reviewed is Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, which is still a mouthful, but way less than that one, getting a very high 36 out of 40, 4 9s around. So yeah, one game got released and one game got received very well, although I'm not sure if any real precedent can be set here with the Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii game. Are we going to see a bunch of Japanese game developers now trying to make pirate games? I hope not, because I think that would go fairly poorly if they did. So I definitely hope that they chalk it up to just being a Yakuza game, and that's why it's successful, and not try to emulate it too much. The Humble Games Showcase 2025 has been set for March 12th. A elusive Kickstarter campaign has been launched with a new adventure game from Chibig. So apparently it was inspired by the secret world of Yeti and It Takes Two. And I guess the name of the game is called Elusive. It is weird, certainly, though, to have game Kickstarters seemingly coming back into popularity. So, yeah. And noticeably here you have a lot of 2D animation being shown, so I would assume this is just an intro cutscene, and then since game animators in particular have no capability of really 2D animating anything, it immediately just jumps to 3D models. And probably a lot of 3D models that are just pre-purchased assets. Inherently, the idea of little people tends to not lead to anything. It seems like they're just people and they are smaller. They don't seem to have any like special powers or special society rules in most of the stories where people have done that. It seems like the little people movies and shows and stories I've seen are very nostalgic and very reverent for what they've already seen, so you have this issue in that people locked into what they expect from the kind of story. And yeah, I don't know what you really do with little people as far as the types of characters you would have in a game, because it really is just like a Jack and the Beanstalk, same situation where I don't know what that really changes. And yeah, I have no idea what the It Takes Two inspiration is there based on the trailer we just watched. Hot Rod Mayhem launches April 15th. It's a fast-paced kart racer being dated. So, still have a lot of people attempting kart racing games, and not a lot of them have successfully happened. Let's see. Tayutama Kiss on My Deity Remaster launches March 27th. That is a weirdly phrased name. It's a romance visual novel, which is not particularly surprising. And at this point, a visual novel getting remastered does not inherently mean that the first visual novel even sold significantly well or has any real relevance. And this would be a great example of where the amount of text that a text-to-speech upgrade to my YouTube Shorts might be very variable. Also, I would have no idea as far as what words are in the text, and I would imagine none of the text-to-speech options have any kind of censorship either, so there is a danger there where a really bad word, like a community guideline strike invoking word, might show up in the description of a game, although probably not. I wouldn't be surprised if like even the F word is probably not allowed on Steam pages in the description. But if it was, yeah, you could run into big danger there. Let's see. Baki Hanma Blood Arena has been announced for all consoles and PC. I would assume this is based on Baki the Grappler, which maybe that is the more appropriate translation of what it was originally called, as Hanma. Definitely looks fairly brutal as far as what looks kind of like a Punch-Out clone. Yeah, that looks pretty brutal. I'll be interested in seeing if people actually want to play a game like that. You have like motion blurs here that almost look like sweat or some kind of white liquid coming off the character. And you have dodge moves, and you have broken nose, and then you have just giant people in general, and then blood. It's pretty extreme. But I do think the Baki the Grappler anime series is about that extreme anyways. So it may not really be out of tone for the licensed material. We now, I think, are at the Gaming on Linux articles. So we probably have talked about several of these, such as Secret Mode splitting from Sumo Group. Scott Hollow the Road Travels Untraveled update is out now. Let's go and look at that and see what the reception here is. It's still early access. The Godot engine 4.4 is out now. I went and talked about that at the beginning of the stream for a very long time. This is kind of a great example though of what a normally sane person would have done as far as a journalist, is take several aspects and headlines and bullet list it to talk about it instead of going into much further detail on things. Although, in fairness, this is not everything that was released, and they have to admit that too, that there's various other new features. Nor is there really an explanation of what jolt physics is. You very possibly are going to have a journalist make an article like this by just picking the first few things they see, just saying, hey, I'm going to grab 10 of these things and then I'm going to stop, because they don't want to spend any more time on it, or they just don't know the importance of one thing over another. Let's see, Valheim should now start faster and perform better with CPU bond when CPU bound with a fresh update. Alright, so Valheim got an update. So we'll check that out on Steam. This game is in early access, and weirdly not even on my follow list. And if there's a reason for that. OpenRA update brings a revamped map editor, high quality Dune 2000 assets, and more red alert missions. This is again an open source red alert engine, in case you really want that or need that to run the old red alert games, which I don't think you really do. Let's see, Warhammer Vermintide 2 gets an easy anti-cheat upgrade, finally working properly on Linux. Apparently now it is just a case too where you can have different launcher options for some games to bypass launchers. Monster Prom 4 MonsterCon has a demo live on Steam. Inspired by classic 90s animation, Nanuka Secrets of the Shattering Moon has a new trailer you need to see, apparently. It was a couple of years ago, there was another game not too dissimilar to this, where it was heavily nicely animated and heavily promoted and put out a lot of press releases, and then by the time the game actually came out, I think there was an actual controversy or two around it, and the game itself was just not particularly that well received. And yeah, this is definitely not like Cuphead level graphics. This really just looks like 16-bit pixel graphics, if I was to call it something, for the most part. So yeah, I'm not really seeing anything amazingly impressive here. This clown is the only thing that looks slightly impressively animated. It does have perhaps some inspiration feels from something like Shantae, in that it's a 2D platformer, and we see less and less of those these days. But I think Shantae's animation for a new game would still be better, and I'd be more interested around it. Let's see, we talked about Acclaim returning to support indie developers and reignite classic franchises. I guess I now understand what that means more. And then Studio Fizban closing down after releasing Rainbreaker. Absolum is a beat-em-up RPG from the makers of Street of Rage 4 and TNT Shredder's Revenge. I'm not sure either one of those games are particularly great sales references. It is kind of interesting to have a new beat-em-up game potentially, and for a company to release two previous old beat-em-up games or older franchise beat-em-up games to then try and go and make their own new IPs. The Steam Deck SteamOS 3.6.23 beta has been released with fixes for rendering issues around the Avowed. It's called Beak Visible, and apparently they fixed pairing in DualShock 3 controllers. They fixed an issue with a mouse cursor could stay hidden while being moved. So yeah, we still are seeing fairly small patches in the betas and the upgrades from Steam OS, and one assumes that they're just working secretly very hard in the background to get to a 4.0 version of SteamOS that could be installed on other handhelds, at least, hopefully PCs in general too. The nice announcement that we probably won't get would be, oh, SteamOS 4 is out tomorrow, and by the way, we figured out that it actually isn't that hard to install on PCs in general, so we now encourage and support you installing it on your custom PC or your OEM PCs. The biggest issue you first would run into installing it on a regular PC is just not having a battery in a desktop computer, and it potentially complaining about not having a battery. Let's see, Steam Beta for March 4th brings game notes via the web and 8BitDo micro support also. I don't know what game notes from the web. You can find them in the game list. Select games under your profile name, then find my notes on the My Game content. They will be added to the Steam mobile app in a future update, so you can make notes on games. Interesting. As a content creator, it would be very interesting if notes eventually expanded to you could put up reviews and let's plays on the games, and you kind of can do that, but I don't think Steam actually hosts any of that, so you'd still have to be hosting it probably on YouTube. Let's see. Yeah, nothing particularly too amazing as far as the updates though. Hordes of Fate, a Hand of Fate adventure, has been announced from the team behind the original Hand of Fate game. Of course, I played Hand of Fate 1 and Hand of Fate 2, and by the time I was done with Hand of Fate 2, I had not played really that much. The game was too difficult, and it was fairly repetitive for Hand of Fate 1. I think just the concept of Hand of Fate kind of falls apart the longer you play it. So yeah, I don't know what really is changing here. Seems almost like it's a top-down twin-stick shooter now instead. Which maybe that will speed up the game and give it more action. Hand of Fate 2 in particular was really slow. But yeah. It's going to be a fairly difficult sales pitch to convince me to play Hordes of Fate. And then, do we have an actual launch date? July 11th for Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Then the humble choice for March has Pacific Drive, plus several other games listed here based on how playable they are on the Steam Deck. 2 Point Museum is launched with Linux support and glowing reviews. I did see that on the Steam front page and thought it was an older game, but I guess I was wrong there. Overwhelmingly positive, super. So I can go ahead and put that on the wish list. I'm still not 100% sure I really want to play these kinds of management sim games, but yeah. Nice reception there. Always nice to see something launch well and successfully. Final Fantasy XVI has removed de novo anti-tamper. More than likely this is the standard pattern in that they just don't want to continue to pay for de novo because they charge more after a while. It almost certainly it's not really trying to make it more playable. There is a question, certainly though, as far as how playable Final Fantasy XVI really would be on the Steam Deck. Plus, plenty of people have been locked out for trying to play it on the Steam Deck in the past, which seems particularly extreme. Let's see, 11-Bit Studios, in contrast, has publicly said they're working on getting Frostpunk 2 to be Steam Deck verified, which is potentially exciting also, though it's been out for a while. And in the last 30 days, it's not being received particularly well. Overall, it's only at 76% positivity. Now bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Jam City has sold the Canadian studio Ludia after receiving an unsolicited offer. Interesting. You don't hear too many stories like that where you just hear of people accepting random offers. This deal also comes months after Jam City laid off 85 workers. So, yeah. Not everybody's job was saved there, certainly, by selling the company. The Jagex CEO Phil Mansell is departing after 8 years at the helm. Let's see, apparently he's also a CVC Capital investor. The CVC Capital investor and Jagex board member John Bellamy will take charge of Runix. So changes are happening there. It'll take a while to figure out if those changes turn out to be good or bad. Acclaim, once again, technically coming back in really name only. We'll see how much of the new Acclaim even begins to feel like the old Acclaim. And at a certain point, I'm not sure anybody really has any reverence or love for Acclaim in general anyways. Then we talk about Monster Hunter Wilds getting 8 million copies in the opening weekend. Seems like we haven't gotten any updates since then. A free-to-play browser game called Urban Dead has been taken offline by the UK's online safety law. Let's see. The Safety Act requires platformers constantly moderate younger players, a feature that developer Kevin Davis said isn't possible for Urban Den. We'll have to wait and see if this happens to more websites or what. This game has been running for 20 years. And frankly, if it's a browser game that's been running for 20 years, then you probably could recreate it very easily to not be a browser game, or download the source code or upload the source code. It was a text-based MMO where players began as either a survivor or a zombie in a quarantine region in the fictional city of Malton. Upon death, survivors are made into zombies, while the slain undead can be revivified into a living person. Interesting. Yeah, doesn't look like much of a game, and I've never heard of it if it's been running for 20 years, so it probably says something. PTW rebrands as Side to begin a new era of support services. I haven't heard of either company. I assume it is going to be a support game development company, since this is GameDeveloper.com talking about it. And then we already talked about Senua Osaka's Hellblade 2 dominating the BAFTA Game Award nominations. 41 titles received nominations in total. Alright, and that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, which there is a decent chance that a lot of these aren't going to be loaded. So I'll have to see what happens here. I just manually opened a bunch of things, so we may find that a lot of these are also already on the fall list, because yeah, I did everything manually. If every time I streamed I had to manually open all of these articles, it definitely would be a much slower process. I may not be particularly generous today. Mutational loading. Oh yeah, speaking of, now that I think about it, I guess I caught up on Shorzy episodes too. It's really not a series that feels great watching it in one long run, nor does it feel particularly great watching it in weekly episodes. It probably is better to watch it in weekly episodes when it first airs, and then maybe it's actually good enough to justify watching it in the long run later on to catch up. But it does just kind of feel like there is a issue there where the pacing feels off. The thing is with Shorzy is that there are at least one scene in each episode that is trying to move the story forward. But then there's at least one or two scenes that seem like they are fairly completely disconnected from what the story is at all. And there are no scene transitions in between those scenes. It's just kind of a fade to black type situation, fade into a new scene. Yeah. And I think that is part of why it feels a little awkward. Also, I think the way the camera work is done is pretty weird. Like, generally, you can't make too many complaints about a director and the way shots are shot, but Shorzy in particular, it does feel like they are picking the wrong kind of shots. A lot of times it is shoulder over the shoulder shots when it feels like it really shouldn't be shoulder over the shoulder shots. And then a lot of times there's just like slow-mo used and reused footage. It's just all very ambitious for something that probably should feel a lot more natural, single camera potentially. But on the other hand, the way it's shot may also be what people like, so I wouldn't immediately assume it needs to change. Just feels odd. This is always odd too. I just don't know why anybody would want shades of green in their game, even if it is trying to evoke Game Boy feelings. It just doesn't make any sense. So here's Idle Heroes Clicker, which would be, I guess, a direct competitor to something like Memento Mori. And really doesn't feel like a lot of comparison. And then I really wonder about these kinds of games that feel just too simplistic and way too I don't know, cell phone game-ish would be, I guess, the way to provide it or describe it. You have car mechanic workshop with a girl in overalls with no shirt. And then you have car wash with a guy in a t-shirt. And yeah. Weirdly, it does feel like a lot of times you get things that are very similar. We have a Supermarket Simulator 2, Supermarket Simulator Pro, trying to create some name confusion with the other Supermarket Simulator that Game Grumps are still playing. Although noticeably it is worth mentioning that Game Grumps aren't really doing anything with Supermarket Simulator anymore. I think they've probably approached the end of the playable content of that game. And it has just become kind of grindy at this point. Pinball Simulator, but it's all black and white. I don't get that at all. Then we're back to Carmen Sandiego. So since that had already been looked at. And here's your Hin prison. Hin, in particular, in Japanese, can mean more generically weirdo than hentai, which particularly AI in Japanese is the word for love. So love weirdo, pervert, basically. Prison being shortened to pre doesn't, I think, mean anything in Japanese. Thrown into prison for an act of self-expression, the protagonist must confront both a violent system and his own actions, or else try to find happiness on the inside in this visual novel from the makers of Nukitashi. Now, interesting here, none of these images feel particularly lewd. There's been a whole bunch of prison games in the past, a lot of Chinese prison games, and nothing is tagged with nudity, so there might be a level of restraint happening here more than I would expect. Full audio Japanese, English and Chinese subtitles. So yeah, my first instinct here would be to not bother to make a YouTube short on this, but I can't deny that it somehow has made it to the front page. It's gotten very high reviews, so it must be a pretty decent story. So I shouldn't censor it or not promote it when everything it's doing seems to be going in the right direction, that a YouTube short would make sense. Although I am becoming increasingly less likely to make YouTube shorts around visual novels, nor have I seen any individual YouTube short be so successful that I have any real feedback on those aspects as far as whether certain games should be promoted over others. While I may love old school point and click games, I don't think I'd make a short for that. Death Stream sounds, just in the title, a little too violent, so I'm not going to make a short on that. I am desperately trying to live up to my ambition this year of not getting my channel deleted yet again. Here you have a card game that doesn't support English and probably won't go anywhere. There's lots and lots of cards games, but really only about 3 or 4 of them are actually worth mentioning. Timo Boyle beats table tennis. Not sure what that is. Deadly Heartbeat Gambit. Again, just seems a little too violent and kind of generic at this point. Copies of copies of copies. Yeah. I'm hoping to get through all of the games quickly today so I can not end up having to take another bathroom break. I definitely have gotten to the point though where I'm taking at least 1 bathroom break every single stream, and yeah, often it is approaching 2 or 3 bathroom breaks every single stream. I also have some concerns as far as grocery prices. I have some groceries being delivered tomorrow, and yeah, it doesn't feel like things are getting cheaper or even staying the same. Yeah, and that could certainly be an issue. The thing is, issues like that could pop up very quickly, and there may not be any real solution or preparation to do to prevent or affect it. Nobody expected the Great Depression. Nobody expected major stock market crashes. Nobody expected bread lines. I had a fairly windy storm yesterday too, although can't really say I knew it was coming. Like, I had already chopped down most of the trees around my house, but yeah, in retrospect, that may have been a really wise move as far as how windy it was yesterday, that I could have found multiple trees, multiple branches blown down or crashing through my roof. That being said, I still have at least one tree I still need to chop down for the danger of it falling on my roof. Anyways, wow, we've actually managed to do a 3-hour stream after weeks and weeks of not doing a 3-hour stream. I don't know if that is because I manually opened all of these tabs and missed a bunch. I don't know how that really would happen, but it's possible. Or if it just happens to be the case that there actually wasn't that much today, which is more believable. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment,